BitFenix made a name for itself with the Prodigy small form factor case a few years ago and has been trying to recreate that success ever since. The BitFenix Shinobi was the company's semi-recent attempt at a mid-tower enclosure, and now they're going after what the company calls, quote, the super mid-tower market with the BitFenix Shogun. The Shogun is what we're reviewing today. This is a $160 case that mixes aluminum, glass, and steel for its monolithic stature and stone-dead visage on the front panel. And before getting to the review, this video is brought to you by Raw Fury, proprietors of fantastic indie PC games like Kingdom, a game that we reviewed and liked some time ago, and the new Hell 'em Up game Tormentor x Punisher, where everyone has just 1 HP. Check the link in the description below for more information. BitFenix's Shogun is the company's new flagship and mixes a semi-custom approach to functionality, which we'll go through in this case, and the expected residence of RGB LEDs located in a few places throughout the chassis. The materials used, the top panel somewhat resembles the Prodigy case, and it's got a 2mm thick sheet of aluminum, and then the bottom's also 2mm thick aluminum. It helps elevate the case, and then it goes all the way under the case, so you're protected from some of the dust in theory. And then further, the internal materials are standard. It's steel and plastic, and the steel for the chassis, the motherboard tray, is about 1mm thick, which is denser than a lot of the cases that are in the sub $100 mark. This is a bit more than that anyway, but those tend to be somewhere in the 0.6 to 0.8mm thick steel, just for frame of reference. The paneling used is a little bit stylized. It's sort of a parallelogram for the glass side panel. The other glass side panel is blacked out, and it's not just tinted black. It's, if you take the thing off and look at the back of it, it's just black, as in literally impossible to see through it. So interesting choice on BitFenix's part for the glass side panels. If you look carefully at the front, it looks like there's support for a 5¼ optical drive, but that's not the case. It's entirely a cosmetic move. Other cosmetic items are mostly relegated to things that also serve a functional purpose. In this case, like better forethought put into cable management with thanks to modular drive cages, an optional EATX extended motherboard tray shield, and an optional quasi-shroud for the PSU. This part is among the more interesting items. The shroud only covers the window side and does not cover the top side of the PSU. Embedded within its more industrial exterior are two 2.5-inch compartments, each outfitted with RGB LEDs that are, for once, actually sort of unique. The LEDs can be relocated to light the SSDs horizontally or vertically, or it can be removed entirely. We like that BitFenix has realized, alongside NZXT, that SSDs are a major bling point going forward, and granted the 2.5-inch form factor will eventually fade, some of these drives do look cool enough to show off. We do think that the LEDs lining the SSD cage are disappointing overall, but BitFenix has the right idea. The lights would be better executed had BitFenix opted for a thin diffuser to spread the light better, rather than the hard brightness of just the LED bulb shining through. A stronger LED may have also helped in this regard, but the rest of the case's LEDs are controllable through the built-in dummy controller that grants 7 colors or an RGB cycle, along with a simple offsetting. You can connect your own controller if you preferred, or plug into Asus Oro, which seems to be getting some dominance among the smaller case manufacturers these days, including Inwin with their ROG certification, or so they call it. This mix of modular components is the overall theme for the Shogun. The hard drive cages are all removable except for one, which is the bottom set of cages behind the shroud, and that bottom set gives you a permanent 2 3.5-inch drive support. And then the top cages, you got 2 of them, each one can be removed or left in. In addition to those, as you'll see, there are holes riddling the motherboard tray. Each of those holes can be used to relocate the cages or video card supports, which are largely not necessary. I mean, they're totally unnecessary unless you have an exceptionally heavy video card like one of the overkill Zotac cards that came out for the 1080s. For the most part, you won't need those, but if you have a card and sag is a concern, you could throw the video card mounts in there. The power supply shroud is also removable and could be taken out completely if you wanted to relocate the SSDs elsewhere, as is the optional EATX extender, which is mostly used to conceal cabling on the backside of the case when looking through, or to add extra pass-throughs for EATX motherboards. Concealing the cabling is further assisted by the blackout tempered glass right side panel, and shows that BitFenix grasps what a few other manufacturers don't. That tempered glass on the right side generally means the user has to work harder to keep those cables clean. And then looking back for a moment at those video card support structures, you'll notice that there's foam on the top side, which is just to protect the video card and its faceplate. There's also foam facing the side panel. We were curious about this and asked BitFenix why that foam was there, the one facing outward, and they just said it was for looks. So can't really argue with that. It does seem unnecessary, but again, for looks, what are you gonna say? As for the stock cooling configuration, the fan comes with two 120mm fans mounted in the front. That'd be sort of front, center, and front bottom. And that configuration means that all of the air is, for the most part, being directed at the GPU rather than the CPU. There's no straight across from the CPU fan. It's all straight across from the GPU or over the GPU in the backplate. A third and final fan is located in the back, and that's your standard 120mm rear exhaust oriented directly across from our CPU tower cooler. If you saw this case listing previously or have seen other reviews, you've likely seen and heard that the front reportedly supports three 120mm fans. However, in working with the case, that's not true. It does support three 140mm fans in the front. You'd of course have to swap the other 120s out for that. And we tested one alternative configuration when adding a single 140mm fan to the top of the front panel, which directs air straight at the CPU. We notified BitFenix about this 3 120mm alleged support, and they confirmed that it officially supports two 120mm front fans and then corrected the site listing. And for the normal testing methodology, as always, the link in the description below has the full article for this case where Patrick Lathan has the complete review and walkthrough of everything, but we also have the testing methodology defined where we talk about things like what does delta T mean, if that confuses you, or if you're not sure why idle can be below ambient, because it's not, it's a delta T value. Check the article, it is defined there and walks you through how all of the testing works and what delta values are and how we obtain them and how we use thermocouple readers to actively monitor ambient, internal case ambient, stuff like that. Let's start with the GPU thermals. In our tests, the intake fans kept the GPU well supplied with cool air for a respectable temperature of just under 52 Celsius delta T, but this cool air continued flowing out the back of the case without ever touching the CPU. Comparatively, the Corsair 270R and the NZXT S340 Elite are just behind this in performance. Moving to CPU temperatures with the case fans at their maximum 1260 RPM, the CPU is shown running at 61.74 degrees Celsius above ambient. This isn't especially impressive, but is unsurprising given the size and speed of the fans alongside their location. With the hard drive cages installed, you're also redirecting a lot of that airflow again towards the GPU. This puts the Shogun right behind the Inwin 303 when we've added fans to it, so that's not the stock configuration, that's with aftermarket fans, but below the toasty 66.18 Celsius DT that our previously reviewed PureBase 600 managed. Adding a Corsair 140mm fan to the front intake array drove CPU temperatures down to 55.7 delta T, and that's Celsius of course, landing it ahead of the S340 Elite, the Cullinan, and behind the Corsair cases. This is because that 140mm fan again drives air straight across the CPU. It's never going anywhere else and creates somewhat of a tunnel of airflow into the cooler and out of the tower. Moving on to noise testing, we see the stock Shogun with its three 120mm fans performing right around where the Corsair 570X sits when the 570X has its three 120mm fans configured to 1050 RPM. At the quieter speed of 1000 RPM for the Shogun, the BitFenix case measures at 32.6 dBA when containing our standardized test bench, and of course the internal components like the GPU and the CPU fan matter a lot more here. BitFenix's Shogun feels appropriately priced, like the Be Quiet PureBase 600 that we just reviewed earlier this week. The Shogun includes several semi-modular and fully modular features, useful for tuning the case specifically to your needs. Granted, this also means that you're paying more and receiving more hardware as a result, so if the modular bays, the PSU shroud, and the VGA holders aren't interesting to you, you're going to be shelling out the money anyway for those unused parts. At $160, this is one of the better cases we've looked at recently. It has a few shortcomings. One would be probably want to change the cooling configuration a little bit, which isn't that hard to do and can be done for fairly cheap, but it does offset your cost if you're planning to buy another fan. Still, $160 baseline puts this around where the Corsair 570X, the Master Case Pro 5 would land, and some of the Inwin lineup just in terms of the aluminum amalgam, I guess. Inwin kind of does that for their thing. So if you like aluminum, or if you like aluminum and steel in the case of this one, look into things like Inwin, Lian Li, but otherwise the Corsair 570X, the Cooler Master Master Case Pro is quite a bit different from this, but same price category, and some of those cases might be worth looking into. Other than this, overall, the build quality is high, the quality of materials pretty high. There's a downside in the installation process in the factory where they've actually torqued the hell out of the screws. So that is a problem we've seen with some other cases coming out of the same factories, or even just cases in general from NZXT. They've had that problem for a long time, where the thumb screws for some of the mounting hardware that's modular in here get torqued so much that there's actually physical, cosmetic only damage to those components. Cosmetic only. It doesn't really matter a whole lot at the end of the day, but it's a small thing that could be improved upon, and certainly there doesn't need to be that much abuse to the hardware. LEDs. The LEDs are not that impressive. So if that matters to you, maybe look at alternatives, because there are plenty of other cases with better LEDs. Maybe the best approach would be to add LEDs to this case. They're actually, BitFenix did send us an LED controller, which would be a separate purchase that we haven't played around with yet, but I guess you could throw one of theirs in there if you didn't want to go for something like a Hue Plus or the SP RGB fans. LEDs overall, stock though, aren't that impressive, but they have the right idea of allowing some modularity. So that's pretty much it for the BitFenix Shogun. If you are interested in this case, as always, we'll have a link to it in the description below. And then, of course, the full review, the written article is there, along with testing methodology. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, or hit the link in the post roll video. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time. Or if you like aluminum and steel in the case of this one.